electricity in local communities. And what's a problem is that these data centers cost tens of billions of dollars. And it's really unclear how these data centers will make money. Because right now, how most will use AI is to generate videos and to like cheat in school, right? To get people to write their essays. It's unclear how this will be beneficial to the economy. And if it's possible for AI to be profitable, this will cause millions of jobs to be lost. So it seems as though the AI bubble is about to burst. The problem, though, is that right now the U.S. economy doesn't make any sense, right? So there's Michael Berry, who is very famous for predicting that in 2008, the subprime market, the CDO market, would collapse, and he took out billions of dollars in bet against this market. He made a lot of money. And then he made a bet in AI. He was certain that none of the fundamentals made any sense in the AI industry. And then he suddenly announced that he was actually losing the industry. And the reason why is, okay, the AI industry doesn't make any sense, but guess what? The entire American financial industry doesn't make any more sense anymore. Meaning that right now, the American financial industry is controlled by a few oligarchs. It's controlled by a minority of people who can dictate the market to their will. And so the average investor, market fundamentals no longer apply to what's happening. So yes, in theory, the AR market could collapse, but because there's so few players within the AI market, it's controlled by some companies, they can do whatever they want. And the American government has something called Operation Stargate. And so Trump has promised $10 billion to invest in the AI infrastructure. So it's possible that this bubble is going on and on. Okay, so this means that right now the American financial industry lacks the capacity to self-correct, and so if the market collapses, it's probably going to take the entire economy with it, and so that's a great problem facing the U.S. financial industry. That's problem number one.
Just look up and shoot the HIVES at the entrance.
Is over-financialization.
Clear the webs.
And that goes back to the silver example, where when China announced that it was going to limit its exports of silver, and China controls about 60% of the silver market in the world, the price of silver went crazy. The reason why is that in China, silver is used for manufacturing needs. So silver goes into AI, EV, batteries, all that. So China really needs silver. But in the United States, silver is used for speculation. So silver is really it's only paper silver. And a lot of these companies, like JP Morgan, they're over-leveraged 300 to 1. So every 1 ounce of silver that they have, they promise 300 on paper. And so, so it's a great bubble that's going to burst. Like what we saw in silver was almost like a small bank run. But it's not just silver, it's almost all its commodities where these commodities are used for speculation. And so the American financial industry is this great Ponzi scheme that's about to explode at any point.
I would just camp on this.
And the third great weakness of the U.S. economy, of course, is currency. Where Bitcoin, it's all just speculation. It brings actually no benefit to society. So you have all these major weaknesses in the American economy. But because, first of all, you have three oligarchs.
If you guys just listen,
second of all, the American government can make as much money as it wants. There's something called quantitative easing. And third of all, there's really no challenger to the U.S. dollar. This bubble can sustain itself past 2026. But when it collapses, the entire society collapses. So you're basically looking at civil war.
The civil war in America.
Yes.
So in terms of gold and silver, you would assume that this rally will continue, given that the paper gold and paper silver has been inflating so far beyond what actually exists in terms of hard assets.
Look, the reality is that demand exceeds supply, right? So silver goes into AI, goes into EVs, batteries, because silver is the best metal conductor in the world, and there's no second. Copper is second, but it's far behind silver. So you need silver, and the world cannot produce enough silver, and this has been true for the past 5 years. And China and the United States are investing heavily into AI. So right now there's a major fight for access to silver, and this goes back again to Venezuela, where Latin America and South America actually are the world's greatest producers of silver. So whoever controls Latin America and South America basically has control over the AI.
Alright, finally.
So things look a bit grim for the United States, and all these bubbles you refer to. Civil war becomes a real possibility. But how do you see this? Obviously affects the rivalry they have now with China. But what do you see on the Chinese side? Because what are the strategic priorities, and how do you see them pursue them? Because one would assume that China would also become a bit more assertive as it becomes more confident, but also as the pressure is building on the United States to essentially break China and restore the 90s if you will.
Yeah, so the greatest strength, the greatest vulnerability in the United States is the US dollar, right? But the greatest strength and the greatest weakness of China is its reliance on export. China is an export-oriented economy, and in order to feed its economy, it focuses on export. And sometimes its export strategies are counterproductive and self-defeating. So for example, it dumps commodities onto the world market, which hurts the trade system. Okay, so China has also a lot of fundamental issues. Right now, the problem is that the United States is threatening to strangle, embargo, blockade China, right? So one thing that will clear up in 2026 is already clearing up right now. It's a rivalry between China and Japan, right? So Prime Minister Takeichi has said that he believes that Taiwan is part of Japan's strategic interest. And what does she mean by that? What she means by that is that if China were to get hold of Taiwan, Taiwan could blockade Japan from access to the Strait of Malacca, and therefore oil from the Middle East, which Japan is dependent on. And so Japan believes that if China were to invade Taiwan, then Japan would have to step in. Okay, so Taiwan is key. But you know, the opposite is true, where if Taiwan were to side with Japan, then the first island chain can embargo China, can block China from trade. So I think in 2026, you'll see a lot more heated rhetoric between China and Japan. And the reason why is both economies are dependent on Middle East oil. And whoever can control the Strait of Malacca can basically strangle each other's economy.
Objective completed.
Oh, look at that. Well, this is the classical problem. Again, I think we talked before about how it's a bit of a cool World War I, that is that China has kind of outgrown this security architecture or economic architecture as well, which is well, more or less designed to contain China. So it's if there's not a diplomatic path to this, it does look like conflict becomes unavoidable. But if we shift a bit towards Europe and, well, which includes Russia, you said that the Ukraine war has been more or less settled, stabilized. I assume you're not referring to stable front lines. I'm assuming that the future of the conflict has been, I mean, that they're
come back to West
now, which seems correct. But on the other side, the reason I focus on the rationality of states is because you see from the Europeans now increasing rhetoric that we can't afford it. If the war ends, then Russia would focus its resources on us. And so one after another, you see these different European leaders and media outlets saying, well, war may be better than peace. So are we prepared to end this war, or how do you see this playing out?
Yeah, so I think that's to watch you obvious. Europe is going to militarize against Russia, even though it is against the best interests of its people. Its people will be very upset with remilitarization. You're already seeing massive protests in Germany. A lot of it is irrational. Meaning, like, Europe has absolutely no path to victory in Ukraine, but Europe's going to send men to their death in Ukraine anyway. because Europe doesn't know what else to do, right? So what Europe is really saying is that we bank on Russia's weakness war, and then we could impose an indemnity on Russia and that would solve all our fiscal problems. Now that Russia is winning the war, we are facing economic collapse at home. We don't really want to face that, so we're going to continue the war and hope for the best. So there's no strategy here. It's suicidal, it's irrational, but Europe is stuck where it is.
Whenever I ask the
Actually, maybe we can't finish the canopy.
Direct war between
There's a fade in there.
Russia and the Europeans, they usually say, very little because the Europeans don't have the troops to reduce suicide. But this assumes that all wars are calculated and deliberate, because I think war, an accidental war by miscalculation would be rooted in this assumption of escalation control. That is, Europeans can't afford to see Russia win, so we'll send a little bit more long-range missiles. We'll try to target the political leadership. Let's blow up some Russian tankers. So we escalate at the same time as pressure is mounting on Moscow to stop allowing the Europeans to step over all red lines. So why should the Russians accept Europeans engaging in direct attacks, killing Russians? They will then retaliate, and I don't think the Europeans want to, like want a direct war. They would just like to kill Russians through Ukraine and then claim that their hands are clean. But I don't think this is coming to an end. From what I hear coming out of Moscow, this
one through bioreactors, two through bioreactors.
You put in the hive like now before they have
to take part.
I was just about to say so.
If you open any Norwegian European or German Marshall Paris, something along these lines. So that this is a real prospect.
Look, I think that the leadership of Europe, the European elite, they live in their own reality.
Keep them distracted though. Make them think
like
doing
YouTube and social media, they're different bubbles. And I think like the European elite, they literally believe that Russia will collapse tomorrow. And we just wait another day, then the Russian economy will collapse, people of Russia will revolt, and Putin will be overthrown, and then Russia will sue for peace. If you just watch their media, they repeat this over and over, and it becomes a self-reinforcing bubble. The EU is just this sprawling, self-reinforcing they are not capable of imagining defeat. They're not capable of imagining different possibilities. They're certain that if they just wait one more day, then the war will be over and they would have won. And if you talk about irrationality, go back to World War I, and for those 4 or 5 years where these millions of people were dying for no reason. And the reason why was these leaders just could not accept the possibility that they had made a mistake. I mean, I understand this is all silly. Why would you sacrifice millions of men because you can't afford to make a mistake? They can't afford to admit that, hey, maybe sending Boris Johnson to sabotage peace talks between Kiev and Moscow was wrong. Maybe blowing that North pipeline was wrong. Maybe antagonizing Russia these 20 years by expanding NATO to its borders was wrong. It's these people absolutely refuse to admit they're wrong, and they're willing to sacrifice their own nations to avoid admitting, being wrong.
Yeah, even now that the loss, NATO losing Ukraine is starting to become obvious, the new goal appears to be, let's move slower. Let's keep Ukraine. It's a little bit longer. Even though it will be a humanitarian disaster for Ukraine and also strategic disaster for Europe, because this is not good for them. But how do you see this playing out in the European security outlook? Because again, the EU and NATO are two main pillars of how Europe has been structured in the post-Cold War era. They're supposed to be the hegemonic order of Europe. Also, US is supposed to rest on, especially NATO. Did you see
there's
them
a lot of
being able to survive?
Hydro.
Well, 2026 might go on, but how do you see this? What would you expect from 2026? complete collapse isn't necessarily
What
the
they got
cause,
left
but
of anything?
Hey, can you handle that? Or
it seems to be deteriorating fast.
You were coming on the other side.
Trump is laying claim to
I'm not gonna run away, dude.
I already did my job. I threw a grenade
the
at him.
Danish Prime Minister trying to refer to Article 5, but I'm not sure if
What are we
America
doing?
will
I guess
come
we
to
can
the
get a
defense of
I
Greenland.
want to get platform
If
first.
America goes
Yeah, let's.
after Greenland. I mean, this is kind of absurd stuff.
Look, the reality is that Trump
Yeah, I need
hates
a res.
Europe.
Need res.
He's hated Europe ever since 2016, when Europe was
Drop seating, simply build it.
when the
Like a-
Europe thought he was
I got
a
a float
joke,
10.
he was a
I
charlatan,
got a float 10.
and
Yeah,
Europe
he
started
just did
Obama
res.
to overthrow him in 2020. So Trump hates
Somebody
Europe,
go build
and you
cheap.
can tell because. You know,
Yeah, I
what was
did.
the first thing
There's
that
no
happened
Hive
after
a minute
Trump won election? He sent JD Vance to Europe to scold Europe for failing
I
Russian
don't see an
civilization,
open
right?
tunnel
For letting in
anywhere.
too many, for letting in too many immigrants, for
Yeah, Paul's-
embracing woke
Paul's gate, that's where
ideology,
they went.
for betraying Christian values. And so Trump would be more than happy to see the entire NATO system collapse. And you could argue
And we get the
that,
gateways,
like you know, Trump is
I'll move it from
forcing
analysis.
NATO to collapse
I was thinking about
because
buying, like, a
Trump is forcing
500
NATO to fight a war
monitor.
to possibly not win against Russia. So I think what's going to happen
Something at all?
is that NATO
Somebody
will
build platform.
sleepwalk into disaster into Ukraine, and the reason why is that it's this lumbering bureaucracy that cannot
save
possibly
brigade.
imagine its own demise. And these are just bureaucrats who just want to collect their own
very
paycheck
quiet.
and who are looking for their own pension.
know.
So they don't really care
Oh, there's
what
Honest
happens.
here, AD.
They'll just
There
be
it is.
told.
Left side.
And this
side.
Oh, he's a
war will
pussy.
be settled in Odessa. I think that NATO will collapse in Odessa because NATO will commit to
honest
defending
ones, yeah.
Odessa. Russia will
They're gonna try
encircle
for a
it,
platform high.
blockade it,
They get jetpacks.
and
Analysis.
NATO will not be able to hold on. NATO will force
I hate the
Europeans
analysis. Yeah,
to
let's
be
move it up
conscripted
to
into the army to die in Odessa.
least-
They will
at
refuse,
least up to
and you will
access.
have civil war throughout Europe. But this is like a 5 to 10 year time frame. It's not gonna happen this year. It's gonna be another 5 to 10
Almost-
years.
nah,
But
that-
it's a slow death for Europe.
Do you want to access it?
Odessa will
Unos
be
alley
like
guys
alley
from
in
West
the
Route
middle
can
of
pinch
the-
Onos. Onos alley guys from West
No,
Route
well,
can
that makes
pinch.
sense. The Russians
their own
accept
depth. You
guys
should.
from Odessa
You should.
as this is to the extent about the Black Sea.
Look at that.
Because
There's another
this is where
Otto
NATO
target.
attacks Russia
Oh,
I see.
primarily from Odessa. And I think
but
the
he's
British
an alley
will
still.
never accept giving up
That's worth
Odessa.
it.
This is, I think, the key prize
Access is up.
in
Alright.
in this war. So you're probably spot on there.
Might need a
How
scan to
about
build
the
this. Yeah, they're
Europe's
coming.
goal of strategic autonomy? This was we heard for many years. Strategic autonomy, European sovereignty. These were the
so
slogans
good
of the
with the
EU. It's very stark contrast to the subservience of the US, which hates Europe. How do you see
Alright,
the
so-
internal cohesion holding in place? Because I think Europe, it succeeded when it was able to deliver economic benefits to its member state as a collective bargaining power. I don't see that anymore.
Alright, let's make a hive kill.
Yeah, so after
Yeah,
1945,
for
Europe was forced to adopt the ideas of the open society, right? This is Karl Popper,
They're in
who
platform.
argued
Go.
that World War
At
II
least
was
get an
caused
upgrade or
by fascism, by this excessive
Nothing
embrace
in there.
of
You can-
nationalism.
you can get the
So to
shells.
prevent another
Focus the
great
shells.
war, societies have become much more open, multicultural, tolerant, and that was the strategy for the EU
Get all three
bureaucracy for
shells.
the past few decades. That's why they've let in so many immigrants. That's why they've embraced.
shells
That's
coming
why
in.
they've embraced woke ideology.
He took
And it's
Colossus.
basically made society,
Alright, regroup you.
much
We're gonna group up
more
again. Five guns and actually push this time to get
polarized.
the Onos.
So you have the real possible civil war in Britain, in France, because they let in all these immigrants,
They just dropped the
and
hive
the
there.
natives see these immigrants
kill
as a threat
Canada.
to their
Kill
cultural
Canada.
identity.
Trying to kill like
And so, wars are fought
Yeah,
because
you gotta move the
people
Onos.
want to fight them
Kill
for
the Onos.
the ones they love. They fight them
Let's
for
set
their
700,
homeland.
600,
So right now,
500,
if you go
400,
to
300.
Britain
Focus
and
in.
you ask them, like, what
Focus
does
in.
Britain mean to you? I think Britain will be hard to answer you. These immigrants
Laser.
in Britain, you interview them and say, hey, are you
Good,
going to go
good.
fight a war in Ukraine to defend Britain? And they'll say, hell no. And they are like, why would
I gotta float. I gotta
leave
float.
this land to go die
gotta
in
float.
Ukraine
There we
so
go.
that the
Nice.
immigrants can take it over after I'm dead? So the idea of, getting these Europeans to go fight anywhere is just ridiculous now. And yeah, I mean, you will conscript quite a few because
That at the end,
these European
unfortunate.
nations have become
There's just
authoritarian.
nothing he could have done.
But it's going to destroy